The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult with your financial advisor. Cutting 401k contributions may seem like a practical solution to free up cash flow if you're struggling to stay afloat. But is this temporary fix jeopardizing your future? A 2025 Morgan Stanley survey found 39% of employees reduced contributions as a result of current economic conditions. So what's the cost of pausing contributions, and what should you consider before making your choice? Joining me today is Brad Clark of Solomon Financial. Some people may choose to consider pausing 401k contributions, especially with everything that's going on right now with the shutdown and inflation and all the same things that we've been hearing. Some people might choose to pause those contributions to free up cash flow. What are some risks to doing that?
Yeah, we see this anytime there's financial issues out there as people start looking for ways to, find additional money, that sort of thing. Pausing the 401k, is such a risk in terms of once we get those dollars into our budget monthly, it can be very difficult to peel them back out, at some point in the future and start saving again. And the cost of that down the road is really astronomically high, especially for a young person. If you're 65 years old and you made that decision, you're only going to work a couple more years. It may not mean that much. But when you're, and most of the people that we see making these kind of decisions are much younger. So, if you're in your 20s or 30s making this decision, this can cost you thousands of dollars in the future. So it's certainly not the first place we would recommend someone go.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you touch on that, because I think when you're younger, you're more likely to draw out of your 401k if you even have one, which is a whole other conversation. But you're more, I feel like, likely to draw out because in your mind, retirement's decades away. So you feel like you have time to deal with that later. But I think a lot of people miss the compounding interest and the impact that has. Can you just talk about why it's so important to save early on?
Yeah, absolutely. So you really have two components when you talk about saving for the future. One is the dollars you're going to put in, and the second one is the time, right? I mean, we're always making some assumptions on rates of return. And so when we look at those rates of return, if that timeline is very, very short, you have no choice. You just have to throw a bunch of money in there because there's no reasonable rate of return is going to move the needle that much. But when you're young, if you're in your 20s or 30s, money can quadruple, 10x. It really becomes phenomenal. And so when you look at a 30-year-old who's saving into their 401k, and you look at the compounding effect when they get into their 60s, they honestly don't have to save a ton of money every month for that to turn into $1 million, even a couple $1 million when they get to retirement. But if you wait till you're in your 60s, you have to save most of that. So that's the piece that people really miss in those early years when they choose to, procrastinate. And that's the whole problem with our American consumer economy, right? Is we need it today and, all those kinds of things.
You were mentioning that, that's not the first place you would tell someone to look if they're considering drawing from their 401k. What are some other options that people have if they're considering pulling money from their retirement savings in order to make ends meet?
Yeah. So if we're looking just month to month, and we're short by $100, $200, whatever the case may be, one of the first places I would tell people to look is, do they get a tax return every year? And And the average American does. They owe $1,000, $2,000, whatever the case may be. It's a very simple adjustment on their withholdings. And now you can put that money back into your paycheck every month. So instead of letting that sit with Uncle Sam till next, January through April, depending on when you file and get one big check, now all of a sudden we can have that monthly and take care of that issue. We would look at debt. What's the debt picture look like? Are there opportunities there to, potentially reorganize it? But probably more importantly, just, put ourselves in a position where we're not spending so much of our monthly budget on debt and start to eliminate some of that. So there'd be a number of areas we'd look at, but boy, stopping that 401k, that would be last on the list.
How do you determine how much you should have withheld from your paycheck each pay period to make sure you're not giving the government too much or not paying enough?
Yeah, so for the average person, when they go get a new job, that can be a difficult thing. You're just kind of listing based on married, not married, those kinds of things. How many kids, all of that. However, when we fast forward a year or two down the road and we've been in this and the circumstance hasn't changed in a big way, we're married, 2 children, that kind of thing, and we're receiving this $2,000 a year in refund, now it's very easy to come back and say, hey, look, I need to adjust this, right? What I'm trying to capture is get this $2,000 refund back into my paycheck on a month-to-month basis. So what you can do is you can go in there and there's calculators you can get online and take a look at the withholdings and start estimating that, turn it into your payroll, and then just look at your next paycheck. Did that equate to, of course you have to think about if you get 26 pays in a year, you get paid every 2 weeks, and what's the math and how's that break down? But that is probably, as easy a way to do that as anything. And factor, where are we at in the year? Right now we're late in the year, so if you make an adjustment, it's only going to be on 2 months. But if you were in February and all of a sudden it might affect the next 10 months, right? So you kind of look at that too. However, if a family was truly in a hardship situation and it's the difference in putting into my 401k or buying groceries, well, we pause the 401k, right? So we certainly understand there could be some circumstances if there were 2 parents working and one lost their job and now it truly is a situation of how do we pay the bills. Obviously something like that could make sense, but if it's just a normal circumstance and inflation was a little bit higher than it had been historically and we can't deal with it, honestly, our budget's way too tight. We've got to deal with those issues first.
If somebody has paused contributions and is listening to this and wants to start contributing again, how do they ease that back into their budget?
That's the part that becomes so tough. And this is one of the reasons we try to help people avoid this is where do we find that money? So this is where we're going to have to get in there and really start digging into the budget and saying, okay, what's going on and are we wasting money somewhere that we could free things up? One of the things that I always try to recommend, most people that we see, younger families in particular, even if they're saving in their 401k, they're probably not saving as much as they should. So an easy place to pick this up is next year when you get a raise and you get a 3% raise, set 1 or 2% aside for the 401k. So if you get a 3% raise, maybe you take a 2% raise to help with the cost of living. 1% of that raise goes into the 401k. Then we do it the next year and we do it the next year. And now we fast forward 5 or so years down the road, we're putting an additional 5, 6, 7, 8% into that 401k. So that's a very easy place because it's new money that we didn't necessarily have before. So that is an area we would definitely look at.
I found a Morgan Stanley survey that found about 39% of employees reduce their contributions. I'm just wondering, in general, are you seeing that with older retirees? Like, have you noticed people aren't prioritizing saving for retirement like they should be?
Well, most of the clients we work with have prioritized that. So I wouldn't say personally we're seeing that. So I'll trust that their survey is probably true, but those may not be the people that are coming into our office necessarily. Typically what we see is as people age, it's not uncommon. They get in their 40s and they'll say things like, I need to start thinking about this. They should have been thinking about it when they were 25 or 30 and they'd have been so far ahead. But then when they get into their 50s, it's almost like it's becoming real. We've got to get real serious. And in their 60s, you'll see that even tend to step up a bit more, unless they are, what you'd call set at that point. But most people we see are still trying to build that and figure that out.
Yeah. For anyone who's maybe feeling like they're in a tough financial spot with everything going on right now, maybe they've been laid off, do you have any words of encouragement for them, or what would you tell them to kind of just take it one step at a time?
Yeah, so I would say anybody who's looking for opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities out there. Everybody is looking for good help. So, if for some reason, the position you're with has been eliminated or changed or whatever, I would just say get out there and start meeting and talking to people and provide value. And I think you'd be surprised at what doors start opening.
All right, that does it for this edition of Not Your Father's 2 Cents. Sources used in this episode will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll meet you back here next episode.